Hi, John. It is good to see you.
It is great seeing you, Sean. How are you?
I am great. I'm super excited. As most people are going to realize when this kicks off, there is no cold open, and I didn't do an intro because I want to get right to this. We have a guest. Uh, Welcome, Orrin.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, it is my pleasure. Like I said, I have no notes. I have only questions, and I have about 1 million of them. So this is going to be fun. But let's just kind of start off with right now. Where are you coming from? Where are you at?
Right now, I'm in St. Andrews, Scotland, um, studying at the University of St. Andrews. So
You're in Scotland right
I
now.
am, yeah.
Wow. Okay. Never been. Always wanted to go, but and we know, John. We know where you're at, but
Yeah,
no,
I think you're.
Orrin,
I
I'm
think
really
you're.
interested.
Sorry, I was just going to say. I think your relatives landed on the shores of Scotland a few thousand years ago, Sean. So you probably do want to go see that, see
I,
what they
I,
saw.
I do, but the thing is then they left again, so
Yeah,
they just couldn't figure out all the places we went. They just couldn't stay. I guess not for very long. So, Orrin, how? Let's just. I have questions about so many things, but I'm trying to stay focused. So, how did you end up in Scotland?
Yeah, so I mean, as the John's sweater says, Boston College, that's where I got my master's degree. And while I was there, I fell in love with a philosopher, theologian named Soren Kierkegaard. And in knowing I wanted to continue on and do the PhD, I was looking for various experts on Kierkegaard, and one of them is here at the School of Divinity at St. Andrews. And so applied to work with him and have been fortunate to be able to do so and continue to study Kierkegaard.
Okay, so you got the degree you got from Boston College. Maybe you said it and I missed it, but what was that degree in?
Yeah, so I got my master's in philosophy there.
Philosophy. Okay.
And yeah, Kierkegaard's one of those thinkers who is on both sides of the theology philosophy divide. And so you find people working on him in both camps. And so, um, yeah, just continued to drift towards this direction of his thinking, towards the theology side.
Yeah, we're going to get into that. That also, the name sounds like one of my people too. So I want to hear
He
all
is.
about
Well, he's a
Kierkegaard.
Dane. Yeah.
Yep, I got a little bit of that. But so I'm just keep going backwards here, but well, not from, you're from Kansas, right? Or
I
where
am.
would you
That's where I was
say?
born. Yeah.
Okay, born in Kansas. Got it. But I just know you've kind of been more places than just Kansas. But we'll just say you're from Kansas. How was Boston College because of the particular program you wanted to study, or how did you end up at Boston?
It was actually an undergraduate professor. I went to undergrad where my dad got his PhD at the University of Nevada, Reno. And as I was planning on continuing the graduate school journey, had a professor recommend Boston College and that program and to continue on in the philosophy. And so it wasn't really on my radar and I hadn't thought of it. And then at her suggestion, I applied and yeah, ended up loving it there.
So what I'm getting from you, not knowing anything more, is just it's not about a particular school or where the school is. We're talking it's the program or the instructor that you're chasing. That's what you're actually going to these schools for. Is that
Yeah.
somewhat
And
accurate?
yeah, I guess the thinking and the ideas too, the way of thinking and yeah, chasing after the place that challenges, but also provides the best place to think through things, I guess. Yeah.
Oh boy, philosopher already. I love this. But John, how do you know Orrin?
yeah. So I was going to say maybe I should step in too because I know
I was
Orrin
getting I was
better
getting
than you
to it.
know Orrin.
Well,
So yeah,
yes.
Orrin is my youngest child. So I have three kids. Orrin is the youngest, and he followed his mom and I. Well, started to say to Nevada. He followed us till he was like 18. He went wherever we went. But then he went to school at the University of Nevada, where Casey and I both got our graduate degrees from. And yeah, and then went from there. And maybe Orrin, I just was thinking when you said that, that might be interesting when you said you were going to the place that allowed you to think a certain way. Are there different ways of thinking about philosophy? Maybe you could just mention that briefly about what you meant by that.
Yeah, I don't know if I can do it justice briefly, but I mean, there are different, I guess, ways of doing philosophy. Uh, the biggest divide, I guess, is continental versus analytic. And the analytic is the more mathematical approach with logic and things like that. And continental uh, get derives its name from European philosophy, and analytic is more the American style of philosophy. So I enjoy the continental more, and Kierkegaard's a continental philosopher. And then also too, there's ways of dividing it by periods of thought, ancient, medieval, modern. So yeah, just the modern continental is where Kierkegaard lands, and so that's kind of the area of focus that I wanted to study at.
Yeah, and
Modern continental.
I think
Hmm.
the continental, and you said the analytical is more logic. They're more careful with how they say the words they use. They want to use fewer, more precise words, I think, if that's correct. And continental is more maybe descriptive. And I think what's interesting is that Boston College was continental. Is that right?
Yeah,
Mostly. And then when you went to St. Andrews, isn't your advisor, isn't he more analytic?
it is. Yeah, There'd,
Yeah. So I was wanting to point that out, that you followed a way of thinking, but then you followed the person who's done a lot of work on Kierkegaard. And I think if in our discussions you said that you also wanted that experience, the analytical side of it too, as an experience, even though you want to follow Continental. So yeah, I was just wanting you to kind of hash those two out. I thought that was interesting.
yeah. I mean, the problem with Kierkegaard is that, as you said, it's very descriptive, and I would also say kind of more artistic, more like literature in a lot of ways. And so it's sometimes hard to pin things down. And so having to work with his thought within an analytic, precise, clear tradition has been challenging, but also has helped me to understand exactly what he's saying and exactly what I'm saying too. So yeah, it's been a good situation.
So going back to Scotland, I want to make sure I get this part right, but you're in the process of getting your PhD. Is that correct?
That is, I had just submitted my thesis to the reviewing committee. So it's in their hands right now, and I'm just waiting to do the oral defense to see how that goes. And yeah, so at the later stage right now, hopefully close to the finish line.
So John has described this a little bit. As I think all the listeners know, I don't have a PhD. I don't have a college degree, but I want to just, so you said you wrote a thesis, you've turned that thesis in, and then John, maybe you can help too, because you were a professor. I still consider you a professor, but so a group of, well, why don't I stop and just say, from at this point in the process, what does this look like? First, John, from your side of this, what would this look like as a professor?
Yeah, well, it's different here in the U.S. than it is in the U.K. A little bit different. Like in the U.S., for your PhD, there are usually three reviewers from your department, and that includes your advisor. And then you get two reviewers from outside of your department in other kind of related fields, because the idea is, as a for your PhD defense, you're offering something new to the field, and it needs to be. I mean, the term is needs to be substantial, but that can mean a lot of different things. But one of the things it means is it doesn't just need to be something that people within your field say this is good. They want it to be larger than that, more well-rounded than that. So people outside your field also have to recognize it as a good piece of scholarship for you to get your degree. So in the US, you have 5 people on your committee, including your advisor and 4 others. And then you submit to all 5 and you have a meeting with them, and they spend a few hours questioning you about the information. In my area, it was also some experiments that I had to conduct. So there was experimental questions and things like that as well. I know in philosophy and theology, it's a little bit different, but it's also different in the UK. So maybe, Orrin, you could explain how it works over there.
Yeah, so in the UK's PhD programs, they require you to have a master's degree coming into it because there's no taught courses. So it's a research degree. And so all you do from the moment you get here is just begin working on the thesis project, basically writing a book, and get 2 to 5 years to do that. And when it comes to the review committee, it's also a little different. The advisor is not allowed to be a reviewer because I guess it's assumed that they've had their hand in it and guided you through the whole process, so they might be a little biased maybe. And then you get one person within the department and then one external to the entire university. So just 2 reviewers, one internal, one external, and they've got a few months to read it. And then at the end of April, I'll sit down with them and do a oral defense. And yeah, hopefully won't be too tough, but we'll see.
So a couple of questions about the thesis. Number one, what is your thesis on?
Yeah, so the title of my thesis is Ignorance Before God, a Kierkegaardian account of innocence within the doctrine of hereditary sin and in dialogue with the cognitive sciences.
Okay. That's a lot for me to unpack, but so just briefly, and not even briefly, take as long as you want. You have to explain that in Sean terms. So I know you're new to the show, but you've listened to some episodes. I'm assuming you know who you're dealing with. So you don't have to defend your thesis with me. You just have to make me understand what it is you're talking about.
Yeah, so kind of my whole upbringing, I guess you could say, like this podcast, is John teaches Orrin about his brain. And so I've always been interested in that and taken that with me. So even though I went the philosophy and theology route, I've always sort of thought in those terms from what I learned and what, being involved somewhat in some of the research, but also being able to just discuss and when he'd come home from work and lectures and just talking about it. So I've always been interested in that like mode of thinking about things. And so applying that to philosophical concepts and things has always been my way of understanding and approaching it. And so this project was a way of dialoguing with Kierkegaard through the contemporary cognitive sciences and in a way kind of justifying the things he says by backing it with the empirical evidence from the cognitive sciences. That's kind of the postmodern, the contemporary way of approaching issues, is to see if there is scientific and empirical evidence to back these claims being made. And so yeah, I was aiming to sort of bolster and justify and also work out and work through and see what other directions we could take with his thought by using this evidence. So it was a synthetic sort of like combining approach between the disciplines. So in particular, I was examining a concept of innocence, and as a theology project, I was doing that obviously in relation to sin, the notion that we're born in sin. Was something that Kierkegaard contested specifically just because he wanted to emphasize personal guilt, which has been a historical contention within the doctrine of, I called it hereditary sin. You can call it inherited sin. Some call it original sin. But that the first human sinned and now it's passed on and it's something we're born with was a worry that he attempted to address because he wanted to emphasize personal responsibility, personal freedom, and guilt. And so I found that notion interesting to work out and try to reconcile with the sort of modern approach to the cognitive sciences. And he was writing just before the theory of evolution came out. And so, taking that into consideration too, to think about how we can address this topic. It was
I have several more questions, but before I do, John, sitting here and listening to that description and everything Orrin just said, like, how's that? What? How do you feel about that?
So I'm glad that I would take him up to the lab when he was little and run experiments on him. That seemed to have had an effect, so I'm happy about that. But no, I think that if you're asking, like in my background, which would also be Orrin's background, of coming out of in Christianity, that is a big contention, the idea of being born with sin and personal responsibility. So, yeah, I was really interested. I was going to ask Orrin, when Kierkegaard, you said it was before Darwin's theory of evolution, but what years was he writing most of his writings in?
Yeah, so he was born in 1813 and died in 1855. So early 19th century, working right sort of at between the turn of like modernity and kind of 20th century contemporary science. So he was, right at the turn of when the authority of scholarship and universities was turning to the sciences and away from the humanities as places of finding truth. And so his being aware of that, I think helps and is why it's still relevant today. And yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, that's good because that was going to be my second point is I think what I like because of I'm biased two ways. I'm biased for Orrin, but I'm also biased on the cognitive sciences side, and I like that I feel like that truth doesn't have to be proven through the sciences. There can be truth outside of that, and I don't think that the Bible has to be held up and biblical stories against science to determine if they're true or not. I think they're their own truth. But I also know that in the age we live in, that the science part has more, even though it's not complete certainty, it has more certainty around it. And so when those two align, it's interesting to me. And so I enjoy that part of it. I enjoy, and I've got to read Orrin's dissertation, his thesis on this. And I enjoyed those parts the most where it aligns cognitive science and what we know about the brain and what we know about genetics and those types of things with the idea of innocence and hereditary sin. How he lines those up is what I found really fascinating.
So let's go back to then. I mean, Orrin, you called it three different things. I don't know why in my head original sin sticks out, but this idea that the original sin that was created is passed down through to all of us. So what we're talking about, or let me ask, because I don't know what we're talking about, to be frank, but when a baby is born, if we're going under this idea, just this is going to be in the form of a question, so you got to bear with me, but because I'm trying to work this out in my head. But a baby's born, and there's the one school of thought is that baby is born with sin. That's the hereditary sin, original sin we're talking about. And boy, this I just went dark. But if the baby dies, at some point before the baby actually can even make a decision about right or wrong or committing a sin, then is it fair to say Kierkegaard was saying, well, if the baby has sin and hasn't even really like formed anything yet and dies, then what happens to that baby? Because the baby dies a sinner. Is that somewhat accurate, or am I just a blathering idiot like usual?
No, that's one of the contentions and one of the points that a lot of people argue. And so one difficulty with that exact point that I didn't address because of the sort of challenge it poses, but scripture does say the wages of sin is death. And so there's the notion, and it's a notion Kierkegaard believed too, that there wouldn't be death in the world had that first sin not happened. And so from that view, and obviously, like I said, he's working before theory of evolution, and it was basically just even the scientific assumption that the world was just 6,000 years old, and that death literally entered the world through sin. And so then, like, kind of following that, it would seem to be that if like the baby wasn't a sinner, then it wouldn't be able to die at all. But since it can die, therefore it must be in sin or a sinner, or born in some way with sin. So yeah, that's a difficult problem. Kierkegaard doesn't address that specifically. I mean, he would say that the baby goes to heaven, but and that it's fine, and I would too. It's a tough
It's a
point.
theory of innocence, though, right? That he was trying to argue for, that the baby is innocent. Even if it's born into sin, it's still innocent, right?
Yeah, yeah. I guess the way that he defines innocence and how I define it in my project, it's not moral perfection or like goodness, it's ignorance. So it's a state of just being completely ignorant, and within that state, being unable to act in any way that you can sort of deem that that agent is responsible and acting consciously, which is what I found the interesting point of connection between the cognitive sciences and his idea of innocence, is kind of that classic philosophical axiom of know thyself. Is then the question arises, like, when did I become a self? When did this self begin? And so examining it in those terms of when did I become a self, or when does a person become a self? And if it's the self that is responsible and the self that can be guilty, then this idea of innocence as ignorance in the early period of all our lives, I think is pretty credible to think about and attribute a sort of state of innocence, even though he does still affirm the doctrine of hereditary sin, um, which is like, one of his big contributions to 20th century theology is being able to reconcile these two, and he does so in a way that I think also aligns with current science. So it's really interesting.
So, John, question. I'm going to bungle this, and John's going to be mad. I'm going to fail my thesis, when or do we know when we're talking about consciousness? Because you and I have talked about consciousness quite a bit on the show, but is there a point where you know what? Let me just stop that and ask you this: when a baby's born, up until what age are they still forming? Do you know what I'm trying to ask?
Yeah, I do. And I wish there was an answer to it. So their brain
Okay.
keeps growing and changing till in the 20s. But
Yeah.
but I think one thing that we've avoided, I mentioned this a couple times on the show, the reason I like being on this show talking about things is because we can set our own definitions. So with the on channel, which is kind of
Hmm.
conscious awareness, and then the back channel is the non-conscious brain, that makes it an easy split to talk about back channel, on channel. And on channel is like the very highly developed conscious awareness and consciousness. But so that makes an easy divider. But the truth is, consciousness has so many different layers and levels to it that it's real. You can define it in many different ways, and so yeah, even like some people talk about it being kind of the cognitive part of being able to think and know you're thinking, but then that the cognitive part has been shown to the definitions of that have been shown to be in down in even non-vertebrate animals. So it's really hard to figure out where that distinction is. And I think that's one of the things Orrin was uh, started out to show in his project to talk about how consciousness develops. So maybe you can. So I don't have the answer. Maybe Orrin, you could kind of enlighten us a little bit more about that. Like when does from the time of birth are there different layers of consciousness, and when does a child kind of become aware of themselves as a self and those types of things?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think it might be helpful too to just kind of outline Kierkegaard's definition of consciousness and give his reasoning for it, which is the sort of criteria that I was aiming to meet when trying to pinpoint when we could say that it arises. So for Kierkegaard, the big distinguishing factor between human and non-human animal consciousness is that humans alone can sin. So this issue of sin is only for humankind and not for any other animal species. And so taking that sort of angle, he thinks like, well, what is it then too that is different about us from other animals? And so the big one obviously is language, our ability to speak and use language. And so as he's working through this, he's saying these must also contribute to the like capacity to sin, which is equivalent to our human freedom, our ability to act as free agents. And so language, self-reflection, I know that's a big one in like self-consciousness, and then a conscious awareness of temporality, so past and future in relation to the present time, and then the ability to make a choice, so deliberate and think about options using language to sort of label the choices and then project it into the future, like I'm going to act later, even though right now I'm thinking about that. So that's ultimately what his criteria come down to sin, is that we're able to understand and then think about, decide, and then act upon our decision of deliberation. And so with that being the sort of baseline for consciousness, I worked through a lot of the literature that saying, like these different criteria that the neuroscience and cognitive science uses can vary widely. And so one of them was, being able to distinguish just your physical body from the external world and being aware of that. And that happens within 24 hours after birth. And so that sometimes is taken to be like the minimum level of consciousness. Another approach is to say that our brains make consciousness. And so if that's the case, then at whatever point the brain is developed is when consciousness should be there, even though, we can't dictate it. And then another one being like the mirror test. Like if you can recognize yourself in a mirror, that happens about 18 months old, that infants and toddlers are able to begin to know that that's their reflection in the mirror. And so some sort of self-awareness is going on there. But, with all of these, like animals also are, or non-human animals are also able to recognize themselves in the mirror and are also able to like distinguish themselves from their environment and be actors within the environment. And so I think using Kierkegaard's criteria was very helpful to really set it out what exactly I was looking for and what exactly makes human consciousness so distinct. And using a theory that you guys have talked about on the podcast before about of narrative kind of being the defining feature of consciousness, that I'm able to have a narrative and think in narrative consciousness, which encapsulates and takes in all these features that Kierkegaard is pointing to as unique. So that being the sort of baseline of like, when does narrative consciousness begin? And I approached it through a couple different angles of just the earliest memory and things like that, which aren't quite helpful because, memories change and could be gaps between memories. And so it's a big part of it, but it's like the narrative itself is this sense of self. So you can't really have this extended narrative without knowing yourself to be a self and having this self that is this same object that belongs to the like, as you guys put it, the main character of the story that you're telling yourself. And so with that as the sort of baseline, it just made sense to have that be this sense of self. And in that case too, the use of those features and things like that start to appear in children around 4 years old. And obviously it's not until early adolescence that like these stories become like well structured and enduring over time. So it's offers a lot of flexibility too, which is needed for thinking about innocence and attributing guilt and responsibility. So yeah.
What I'm, yeah, because I'm trying to not reconcile, but it seems to me, philosophy, and neuroscience are just so, in my brain, they're so far apart. And what you're doing in putting them together like this is I mean, there's a lot of things you've said that are just, peeling my wig back here, but like those two things in particular, I'm learning a lot about neuroscience over the last couple of years from John. I'm only recently even started uh, thinking about talking about philosophy, but I obviously don't know enough about each one of those things to understand how you can put them together like this. So for you, for me actually, but how do you think about philosophy? Just the philosophy part. What does that mean to you?
Well, I mean, the term itself from the Greek means the love of wisdom. And so I think in a lot of ways that's the big root of it. But also, there was no distinction between the sciences and philosophy for a long time. I mean, the natural sciences were just called natural philosophy. And so it always has been sort of within philosophy, this sort of conversation and this sort of approach to doing the natural sciences has just been a branch of philosophy until, um, I mean, it's hard to pin down exactly, but what they call modernity, so like the 18th century-ish is when the real big split happened between the two, and like empirical methods were being employed to do observational stuff more so than just the thinking about thinking and thinking about the natural world. So
Yeah, the
John,
tools became available at that point because before that,
um,
before you had the microscope and the different tools of science, your mind was the tool of science, and you had to think through those things. So philosophy was the tool to understand science, and then we started developing new ways to measure things and to record things, and so then that started taking the kind of the driver's seat for science, and then it's they've split so far by now that you're right, it's difficult to see those two as even going together. In fact, some universities are even arguing about getting rid of some of the humanities and philosophy and just keeping the sciences. And it's like that, why would they've split a little bit, but the mind is still a tool of science. So it would be really good to keep that tool update and keep it sharp as well, rather than just have the microscope and the scales and those types of things.
yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So I guess I am hitting on something that's occurring now. Orrin, thank you for bringing up that there was a time that this was just a branch of it. They were together, but now again, in my lifetime where I sit now, at least, in my tiny brain, it's like these two things are so different, but they're really not. And it's really interesting, John, that you brought up that even, that at that level, they're talking about getting rid of some of those courses.
Yeah.
Cause again, I disagree with that assessment, on their part, but, it's just a really interesting, fine point to put on this. But, we're in back to Kierkegaard, the modernity, that I know what John's saying about the tools and all of that, but that's the time of Kierkegaard, right?
it is,
This
yeah.
time frame.
He's right after this split. This split happened,
Yeah.
and people are sort of picking their sides and drawing battle lines between the two. And so he was especially worried when it comes to theology of relinquishing authority to the sciences and the empirical sciences for things specifically to do with theology. Um, Not saying that there wasn't anything to be gained from the sciences, but just saying that that is the incorrect way to approach theological and philosophical questions. And so, I mean, in a way, that is sort of one of the ways that philosophy is still relevant, is because we don't know what exactly consciousness is and how to define it. Science can't and hasn't been able to explain it. We've looked at the brain in all kinds of ways, and the science doesn't point to anything in particular. There is no special region of the brain, as some early philosophers thought that there'd be a spot where consciousness was in the brain, or when we know that our brains don't work much different than any other animal. And so it just leaves the question open, like, then why or how is this occurring? And science can answer it. And I think theology and philosophy have a lot to contribute in that arena to help make sense of what's going on, even if we can't find like the sort of root of it within observational science. So
And I
kind of
haven't
leaves
got
that
to
door open.
the third leg of this bar stool for me is theology. I haven't got there yet. I was just uh, really I wanted to start with the first two, philosophy and science, and I unintentionally asked a question that science apparently can't answer. And so I backed myself into this perfectly, and I didn't mean to. So I can't take credit for it. But I asked a question about consciousness that the two scientists here can't answer, proving the point, in at least in my brain. Maybe it's confirmation bias, but that's why we need philosophy, because that's the piece that you just described. So that I just, like I said, I don't want to pat myself on the back, but good job, Sean. But let's take now the third part, and theology, because I don't have a very strong background in religion, theology, any of this. Um, but it seems like, again, I'm talking about now because I'm learning a lot about the 1800s, where things were kind of stacked. But it felt like science and religion, or it feels like science and religion are at odds all the time in today's day and age. And so the third leg of this, now you're taking cognitive neuroscience, philosophy, and theology, and you're talking about you're using each one of those legs to talk about the other two. It's fascinating to me. So can you just put can you explain that better than I just did?
Yes, I mean, obviously, with making theological claims and assertions, there has to be some agreed upon assumptions that, even if we're not going to specifically take a Christian point of view, just to take what they call more generally like the philosophy of religion, take that point of view. The one assumption that has to be agreed upon is that there is such thing as a God or a divine mind that created. And so if you think in terms of intentional design, it allows for these disciplines to have a clear bridge that they're all part of the created world. And so since the brain and the physical sciences are examining what has been created, then all the systems and ways of being in the creation should also, and do also, in from that assumption, follow that they all are talking about the same thing, just in different ways or using different approaches to explore the same creation. So I think, yeah, taking that assumption, I know, like you said, there's a lot of contention between science and religion these days, because that point alone is what's disagreed upon, which is a new phenomenon. But if science and philosophy and theology are all operating on the assumption of a creator behind creation, it allows for this sort of just like cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary work towards finding solutions and thinking about things.
John, any thoughts about all this part?
Yeah, I think so. My mind keeps going back a little bit to what was said earlier, when I mentioned that the universities were wanting to take the humanities and philosophy out, and I realized I misstated that. It's not the professors and universities want to do it. It's that those aren't as appealing to students anymore. They don't want the philosophy. They want the science or the business school or something like that. So they're talking about getting rid of some of the departments, just practical reasons to stay in business, really. But I think a lot of universities are starting to, I know when I was at Dickinson College, starting to create spaces for professors' offices where they have to interact with each other, where you have in a pod of offices somebody from biology, somebody from psychology, somebody from philosophy, and then you're interacting with each
Oh,
other more. Then they have a table sitting out in the center, and you end up visiting and sitting down, and then all of a sudden your projects, you can start finding more depth and ways to look at it. So I think universities, I know research, I know scientists still see a benefit, even though some don't pursue the benefit. But then going to what I think what Orrin was just saying too was that, at one point, science and philosophy and theology all lived together, and there wasn't the split. And now it's gotten to the point where there is a definite split where it's almost like, if you state a point of view, if you say, well, what makes you state that? If there's science evidence and I'm religion, then I'm against it. If it's a religious evidence and I'm for science, I'm against it. So it's almost like, where's that coming from? And then I'll decide whether I'm against it or not, rather than evaluating things as they come through. And I think it's too bad, because if I know from the religious side, if you believe that there is the one creator, the one, deity or God, then that one deity or God must have created everything, including the systems that science operates under. So it shouldn't be threatening to people in religion. And with science, maybe they have a little bit more of a reason to feel that it's threatening, but religious people shouldn't, and they're usually the ones that feel the most threatened by it. So I don't know why we got to this point or how we got to this point, but it is kind of sad, really.
and that's so the interesting thing. And you and I have never talked about this. John first, and then I want to hear from Orrin. But John, I think everybody knows you're a scientist. You believe in science. It's a lot of your life, but you're also a Christian. And so where, yeah, like what you just said, and it's not only science and religion. I was just talking to my wife about this yesterday. We have just become like super fans of whatever our thing is. So whether it's your political party, your beliefs, your belief in science, your belief in philosophy, it's just like, I'm a Vikings fan, and I hate, and I hate the whatever team is the rival. And so if a Viking, and John, this we've talked about, but if the Vikings running back gets a DUI, I'm like, come on, take it easy. Everybody makes a mistake. But then when my rival team, somebody on their team does something, it's like they're horrible. Like that team is just full of criminals, and that there you go. So, but you you can apply that to, like I said, political party, so many things. But it does seem like what you just said is very prevalent today of like, where's that coming from? That's religion. Well, then that I want to see the science. That's my belief system or whatever. So you long fascinate me, John, in this area of like, you have both of these things, and you have, in my opinion, reconciled them beautifully. And it's just, I just want to point that out of like, it can be done, folks. You can be a Democrat and maybe still vote for the right Republican. I don't know. But John, just to remind everybody, your dad, so your dad was a preacher,
Yeah,
a,
yes, he was a
wait,
minister.
pastor, minister.
Yes, he
Dang
was
it,
a
I get that wrong.
pastor. He
Um,
was a pastor,
okay.
minister, yeah, and he had his
Oh,
PhD
in,
in higher
he had a,
education, in higher
that,
education administration. Yeah,
yeah, but see where it starts is like education, but a preacher. See the
yeah.
right, those two things, and so that
Mhm.
leads to John, and now to Orrin. Orrin. So I mean, that's your grandfather, and then obviously I just talked about your dad. But I mean, number one, is what I'm saying even making any sense? But number two, like just is that kind of the space that you think that you're filling as far as like Christian, the science, all of those things? And how did it get to this book that you wrote, this thesis?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not sure if I'm filling any space exactly. I'm just doing a lot of synthetic work of all my interests. And so, yeah, obviously,
That's a
being
good way of
raised as I
putting it.
was, I
Yeah.
haven't been afraid of science at all. And so, one way to look at it too is that just like the science and the discoveries and what we find. is just revealing more about the creator and being able to have more reasons to wonder and worship. So I don't see it as a threat or a danger or anything like that. But I do like your analogy of the sports teams. I think, as my dad was saying, like, why are religious people so afraid of science? I think it has become more like that. Like, just you picked your team and now you gotta hate the other guy. But
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so I think that is part of the problem. And I thankfully haven't had that problem or that stigma growing up. So yeah.
So can you imagine being a Vikings fan and a Detroit Lions fan, or being a Seahawks
No.
fan and a 49ers fan? Because that's when you said that I found a balance. I was going to say it's a really lonely road, because around religious people, the fact that I believe in science kind of puts me off on my own, with really, just Orrin and I standing there. And then in the academia side, if you believe in God, that puts you kind of over standing by yourself. So, yeah, you got to learn to be comfortable with yourself if you if you decide to try to balance the two. Because if you pick a side, then you can join the team, and I started to say join the kingdom, but that would be the Chiefs. You can join the kingdom and really cheer for one team only, or you can be the 12, right? Or I don't know
Yeah.
what's Vikings, the you can be part of the ship,
No.
or
D Yeah, I don't know what the
school
fans are
Viking, whatever
called.
the school is. Yeah. So, but
Cole.
but that's you can pick your side, but if you're trying
Yeah.
to balance it is a little bit more difficult. I wish more people would do that, would balance it, not necessarily with their sports teams, but with science and religion.
Yeah, but I mean, the sports analogy does fit when you talk about super fans, and you and I have talked about super fans on the previous show, and it does extend, like I said, to I keep saying I'm trying to think of a third example, but politics, the topic we're currently talking about. I know there's other things where people are picking a side, and that's my side, and anything else is just wrong. I don't agree with them. I don't like them. Blah blah blah. All of that. When the most fascinating part, excuse me, the most fascinating part of all of this is that what I learned, I've learned a lot from Orrin today, but the idea that all of these things as early as the 1800s, because it sounds like that's not that long ago for what we're talking about, that all of these things actually were viewed they were together in fields of study. They were not that far apart. And then now, and I mean, I don't know where it happened, but somewhere it's like, oh no, these are very separate topics. They are, and they're opposing each other. And I just, because, humans be human, and somehow we did this. And I know we did it, but I'm now wondering, and boy, I don't want to over state what's going on with Orrin, but like I'm wondering if what this path that you're on, this dissertation you're about to defend, if that might bring us a little bit closer to bringing these things together again. It's an exciting prospect for me to think about it.
Yeah, that's a good
John, I thought you were
question,
going to
Yeah.
Orrin.
say something.
Do you think that it's kind of the things are going to come back around, and maybe it'll be okay to be talk about science and religion at the same time? Do you think that there's going to be a swing back in that direction, or is it just going to keep dividing further and further? What's your feeling?
No, I mean, this work is coming from the theology side, but that is the move that theology is making, is to start approaching things in how I did in my project. I can't speak on behalf of like what's happening in every scientific discipline if they're also working in that direction to reconcile back, but at least from philosophy and theology side. And some people might say it's the fear of being left behind and left out, that they sort of have to make that move and make those compromises and reconcile
Hmm.
if they want to keep being involved in the conversation and part of it. But no, there's a lot of work being done doing sort of what I'm doing in different disciplines and different fields. And yeah, so
I don't want to put you on the spot, but when you were talking, I just had a thought about just about religion and specifically religion in this country. I keep forgetting Orrin's not in this country right now, but but in this country right now, it is, I think, and you two can speak more on this, but mostly Christians, but this fight about identity of what it means to be a Christian today in America, because there's this movement, the white Christian nationalist movement. There's all these kind of, I don't know if they're little factions or fractures within the religion, but um I mean, I've been listening to James Tellerico, who is very openly religious, running as a Democrat, and the things that he talks about and condemning, this other kind of movement of Christianity. So anyway, I'm curious, Orrin, to start with you, and then I want to hear John too. But like, uh, any thoughts about what I call the divide within? And I know Christianity is that's a giant tent to be under, but just any thoughts philosophically about what's going on with that?
I mean, just historically, that's kind of been how it has always been. Like you said, humans be humaning. I
Yes, they
mean,
do.
it really, yeah, hit ahead in the Protestant Reformation and Luther and that whole split from Catholicism, and then further splits. But there was splits prior to that the Catholic Church just deemed as heresies, but maintained the central sort of claim upon this alone is Christianity. Even though
Mhm.
those different splits and ways of seeing things, and even people who were Catholics throughout history, not necessarily maybe understanding or agreeing with every tenet of the Catholic tradition. So it's in terms of just splits between views within Christianity, it's not as new as the split of science and philosophy type recency. So I
Mhm.
think that one's been around for quite a while. I think it's more pronounced now because all these groups are able to interact with each other from all over the world and fight about it, and we get to watch it happen and play out in ways that other times didn't have to necessarily put up with or see all the time. But yeah, I think it's just part of being human, and it'll always sort of be split, or at least maybe not always split, but there will be splits between views and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, back at the times that you're talking about, I would have to sit down with a quill, by candlelight and write an angry letter. So maybe a little bit different than jumping on X and, saying whatever. John
Yeah.
John, do you have,
Yeah.
John, thoughts about that? Anything?
Yeah, I just think social media has really ramped things up. And then, I mean, television, first of all, which has been around for a while, but television, being able to get a platform where you can spread your ideas widely without having to get your quill out and write a letter. You can just talk about things in that meeting, which opens the door, by the way, to a lot of new people, which is usually good to give more people access to influence. But that's another type of way to think about influence, because now you're opening it up to different ways of thinking and influencing, which is good. But television did that, radio does that, and now social media. Yeah, it's just you can interact with people, like Orrin said, around the world and argue things out and get in fights. When it's, I most people are raised in the town you were born in, and you've got that town and those influences, and then you're trying to argue cultural issues with somebody halfway around the world that neither one of you have any idea what the other one's been through, what their life is like, and it just you think that they should see the world just like you. So it starts those arguments. And then when you add religion into it and politics, and right now it seems like politics in the US anyway is what drives religious beliefs. So it's not, it can be, it's kind of interesting to watch people who take a really strong religious stand, and then their political party moves, and then they have to also move, and then how easy they can explain that away and rationalize. And it's an interesting dance you have to take sometimes if you decide to follow a group and then explain all of every other thing lined up, like your politics, your religion, the sports team you cheer for, all of those things. when you decide to latch on to something or someone, all those things get drug along, and you're explaining and rationalizing a lot. It's a lot of work to keep up with all of it.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of
But
effort.
but I mean, I'll just say, as a heathen, right, as like a not uh, understanding a lot of the religious part, my belief, my understanding is at its core is like we're supposed to be good to each other. We're supposed to take care of each other, be good to each other, and the idea that, like, if that is the central, and maybe that's not your view of the central tenet of religion, but that's my view of Christianity, is let's just be good to each other and let's take care of each other. The rest of it, and that message seems to get lost in the, oh no, this is what religion means to me, and this is my team, and we're going to defend it. Oh wait, we're shifting course a little bit. Okay, we got to come up with all, John, to your point, is like you can rationalize all of these decisions, all of these views, and it's just, Orrin repeated it, because I think, Orrin, you can steal it, but humans be human, and whenever there's humans involved, we're gonna be having these conversations. I agree about social media though, and TV and all that, but I mean, whatever happened before that, we were still doing this to each other. So it's, I don't know. That was a little rambling diatribe just about, let's just, I don't care what your beliefs are, but can we just start with, let's just take care of each other? Let's be good to each other. Let's take care of each other. That's a good
I
start.
think what is it in
But
Christianity, Orrin? What Jesus said, there's two rules. Everything really falls under two things:
what
love
are they,
God
Yeah.
Orrin?
and love
Okay.
people.
Yeah, I'm down with love people. I should just simplify it. Just love
Love
people.
God and
That's
love
good.
people, and then everything else falls
Okay.
in line. Everything else is okay if you do those two things.
Yeah. See, I like it simple. Keep it simple for me. Or in
As a
anything
big if
that
though.
I didn't ask, that you didn't get to, that you're itching to drop on us. Any last thoughts?
Not anything to add, but I guess just to wrap up how my project concluded is that the way that Kierkegaard's able to reconcile this sort of inherited sin and the state of innocence at the same time is to really place the emphasis on all of us being human. And so part of like who I am and what I am is that I am a human being and belong to the human race. And it's easy to see it with like our immediate family, like that's just that feeling of like, this is who I am, and these people are an extension of me, and I'm an extension of them. And if you're able to just see that with everybody, which is grounded in and part of that love everybody, then there is this communal belonging to humankind. And so, just as if one family member goes through a hardship or suffers, then the whole family does. And so, that's one way of looking at the sin. Whereas, even though I'm not yet responsible maybe for something in particular because I don't have that capacity or agency and I'm still ignorant of like myself as this self, I still suffer with and belong to and am part of what's happening. And so I just, yeah, really like that way of bringing the two together. And I think the way the science explains it, plus the sort of emotional feel that he evokes by pointing in that direction, helps to better understand, I think, in a correct way, what's happening with that doctrine. So, yeah.
Wow, yeah, I love the way that you put that. I loved, I think I said it, but just your passion for this is, it just, I can hear it when you're talking about this, and I love that. And so what, just to remind me, your end of April, is that when
Yes,
you're,
correct.
you're running the gauntlet, so to speak? End of April.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, hey, I don't think you're going to need it, but good luck, facing
Thank
down
you.
those advisors. John, anything, last thoughts?
No, I enjoyed. I'm glad you came on, Orrin. Thanks for coming on and sharing your thesis with us and your thoughts. And when Orrin comes home, it's always so much fun just to sit around and talk about all this stuff. We talk for hours about this kind of thing, and also, in Scotland we catch up once in a while on WhatsApp. We'll talk to each other. And so it's always fun. But yeah, I just, you're right about the passion that Orrin has, because I see it and you can feel it, but it's something that
Mm-hmm.
you have to have if you're going to take this route, because if you're easily distracted or you want to do multiple things, it's really difficult. It's difficult to take this route, but if you're not focused and passionate about it, then you're probably not going to succeed. So Orrin is right at the
Yeah.
steps of succeeding, and you're right. I think he will soon. So we've got Orrin,
That's
you better
great.
succeed, because we're making plans to be over in Scotland for a graduation. So putting
Yeah.
No
pressure on
pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no pressure,
It all
Orrin.
hinges on that, but other than that, should be fun.
uh yeah, Orrin, again, thank you so much for taking time out to talk with us. I learned so much today. I cannot thank you enough. And real quick, John, well, for everybody, but I haven't shared this with you, but uh, for the longest time, we were not on Apple Podcasts because the two systems I was using just didn't like each other. But we are now on Apple Podcasts.
Wow.
So if y'all want to find our podcast on Apple, we're still on Spotify, we're still on Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, but we are now also on Apple Podcasts. So
I
um,
think we're on
and
we have more platforms than we have listeners, I think.
I don't think so. You might be surprised, actually. Oh, and if you want to watch us, I don't know why anybody would, but we're on YouTube as well if you want to watch us on video here. But uh, uh, hit us up on our socials. I'd love some comments about this topic.
Yeah,
This
I would
and
too.
Yeah, I'd love to hear even, either how dumb I am or how crazy these two are. I don't know, but just, hit us up. Let's connect on any of our socials. John teaches Sean about his brain. And yeah, that's it. Until next time, take care of yourself and we'll see you then.
Grain juice, Sean.